Welcome to RGBA, colorful tech news and reviews. This is episode 76. My name is Alexandre Valliere-Lagacé, and I'm joined by my co-host, Darabina.
Have a little bit of a follow-up. Face ID is still awesome. That's it.
Yeah, that couldn't really change in the bad sense. It can only get better, I think. It's going to learn your face.
We had this kind of blizzard yesterday, and I was walking outside for lunch. I had my gloves on and my hood of my coat, and I had to make a call. So Touch ID, since my gloves don't have like this little things to play with the screen, I just Touch ID'd in, and I told Siri to call, and everything was good without using my hands. It was really cool.
So you Face ID in, not Touch ID in?
Yeah.
And you said, hey Siri, call whatsoever, and
Yep.
She did it?
Yep. It was like living in the future.
Dick Tracy move, nice. All right. There was, I think, only a single humongous, huge, amazingly large story this week.
Yep.
I'll try to summarize it quickly because at work we had, I think it was the first time that the security talk channel was in Slack was so active. It was amazing. Basically, there's a set of vulnerabilities in processor design. Therefore, I think I counted about 5 official advisory reports. So there's at least 5 distinct vulnerabilities. They are spread into 2 groups. The first one is, I forgot the name. Jeez, that starts well.
Meltdown, Spectre.
Meltdown one. Well, everything was already known by security researchers since last June. And they had a cutoff date, a release date, if you want, of I think it was January 9th or something like that. So next week, basically. And they all agreed to work on this in the meantime, patch it up, and get everything fixed, tested, and published. Hopefully, even released and already installed into different computers and electronic devices by January 9th. But for some reason, it started to leak. I think it's the register leaked to the story first, early I think it was Wednesday. And basically, when this happens, when leaks occurs before we have the full story, then we start to have details, but by just by the drop. So at first, we heard there's a problem with Intel CPUs. All Intel CPUs are badly designed, and the only way to fix that is to change your CPU. Okay, so people were freaking out. The Intel stock was going down. Even the Intel CEO sold most of its stock last September, where he knew about the problem since June, and usually he only sells about $2.4 million worth of stock every year, but this time he sold $24 million worth of stock, and he only kept the bare minimum he had to retain to stay CEO. So, okay, that's a big problem by itself. But the whole thing with those security vulnerabilities is that we heard always conflicting information over the couple next days. So let me resume what we know as of this today, which is Saturday. So there are 2 main groups of problems. The first one is meltdown. Meltdown affects almost exclusively Intel CPUs, and this can lead to a process being able to read from memory, which is not his set of memory, which is basically a system memory. And this way they can retrieve any information that was recently in memory, and they can do this attack repetitively. So they can basically scan, and it's as if you had basically full access to everything in memory, including all of the system stuff. So any certificate, any encryption, any password, whatever, it's in memory, then they can easily read it. So this problem came from CPUs that are trying to be as fast as they can. And one way to do this is to try to guess what will be the next couple instructions that will be requested to the CPU. So they try to guess and they execute instructions in advance when they're not solicited, so that they try to already have the information ready and set when you really ask for it. The problem is that you can make this happen in a way that this instruction will be reading system memory. And this preemptive read, if you want, does not check for your accesses. So as a process that only has access to its own little chunk of memory, you don't normally have access to the whole set of memory of the system. That's one of the main features of the Linux and Unix-based systems. And today, even Windows and all the other OS are like that. But the thing is that this preemptive read does not check for security validation. So therefore, you read from system memory and you get information back, and you don't check back if that information is supposed to be accessible from you. But that preemptive read stored that information into another part of the memory where you can then access it. So that's kind of let's ask for something I don't have access to, put it somewhere temporarily, and then the real, if you want, hack or the real problem is that then you can read that little safe state of memory from the side. So that can cause lots of problems, as you can guess. So Meltdown is supposed to be only Intel CPUs. It's even accessible from JavaScript on your browser. So basically, all the browsers right now can trigger something that can trigger something on the CPU level and get the information back. So Meltdown, that's a big problem. It's supposed to affect Intel CPUs. We heard things that this would impact the performance between 5 and 30% decrease of performance. So if it was fixed, basically that's what we're going to have in terms of drop. From what we know right now, we started to have some patches come up, and I think the biggest amount I saw was about 3%. So I think there's a way to mitigate this, or if not, fix the problem, because the only way to really fix this instruction coding problem is really to replace your CPU. But you can always, in the OS, know about this problem and behaves differently. So that's the first part. The second part, Spectre. This one is, once again, the same kind of thing, another technique to read from memory where you don't have access to. And this one affects every CPU. So that means all the Intel CPU, all the AMD CPUs, all your iOS, all your macOS devices, everything. But up until yesterday afternoon, we started to see some reports, one from Apple at least, that was very, very vague about this one. Meltdown, they already patched it in the last couple of releases, and there's still some more work to be done, probably in terms of performance, so to make sure that it still is fixed, but not too much impactful in performance. So there's more fixes coming up. But for the Spectre, they were really, really vague, and that tells me that either there's not much they can do for now, or they still haven't done their full investigation, and we're going to hear more from them in the coming weeks. But from any security researchers I've read reports from, the Meltdown can be mitigated, meaning that they can work their way around it. But for the Spectre one, there's no way to go around this. So this one will probably be the big one. Also, it's much harder to use. But as I explained to some of my colleagues yesterday, in the technology world, everybody builds on top of the previous guy. So, of course, if you are one little hacker and you try to use that flaw, yes, the endeavor is quite humongous. But as we know, people will start to release code, will start to release techniques. There will maybe even be libraries for that. And people will start to build on top of the previous guy's work. And in a couple of weeks, for sure, there will be probably a single command you can run, which will attack a server and get all the information back. So it's just a matter of time before that very hard to exploit vulnerability get exploited. So that's why maybe companies are still vague. We'll have to see what they do. The real problem here is the long tail of those vulnerabilities. So yes, your iOS device and your macOS device will be patched today. But what about your security camera running an ARM processor, which will never get firmware updates from the manufacturer because it's a discontinued product? So you will be able to have devices with problems for the foreseeable future. This design flaw has been there for 20 years. We, in terms of the security community, have just discovered it, but there might be people already exploiting it. Maybe the NSA knew about it, Maybe somebody else knew about it, and that's why we had so many hacks in the recent years. Of course, the future hacks you'll hear about will mention that it's because of this problem that everything was hacked. That's what they're going to default to right now, I think, because this vulnerability is so large. So you will see problems coming up for sure for devices that are not updated in the coming weeks, months, and years. And we will still hear about this in 10 or 15 years for sure. The Heartbleed exploit from, was it like a year ago, 2 years ago? We still hear from it again. And once in a while, you hear about somebody being affected by that. So, and normally everything should be patched by today, but there are still servers, there are still services that are not, and that's what the problem is. It's the long-term issues.
Yep. And just for follow-up, Heartbleed was it was introduced in 2012 and it was publicly disclosed in 2014. It's during Heartbleed that I bought 1Password.
Okay, yeah. So already 5 years. Wow, time flies, man. So yeah, so up for today, what you can do right now to protect yourself. Of course, stay current, up to date with all your OS versions of all your devices. Make sure that your apps and your firmwares and everything is up to date. All your smart devices, your Wemo switches, your Hue lights, your TV, whatever, anything that has a password on it, basically, or has private data. Make sure it's up to date. Your NASs. If you can, also your security cameras, those things that you basically plugged in once to set up and never touched again. These are the most effective products, so hopefully they are still supported. Most of them, sadly, will not be. So you will need to basically make sure that if you want to continue with that device, that there's no security concerns. A quick example, let's say you have a camera that is accessible from the internet. It's an IP camera. You have a password or whatever, and for some reason, somehow, somebody gets into the camera. Well, they can easily retrieve your password from there and log in as the camera and basically look at you and your private life, or they can update the firmware to be something else. Like, the ramifications are huge. You can do basically anything, because once you have access to the memory, you have access to anything that is secret on the device. So passwords, keys, secret handshakes, whatever. Everything is there.
The only, the easiest one I found to read and the sums it up is the Apple support page. And also just to make sure, if you're on 11.2, Meltdown is supposed to be patched or half patched on your iPhone and iPad and all that. And for the Mac, it's 10.13.2. And apparently the Apple Watch is not affected for some reason.
Well, probably because the design is so different that it does not work the same way, I'm assuming. Maybe for power reasons, you don't try to preemptively execute instructions that you're not asked to do. Because let's say you receive 5,000 instructions per minute and your CPU tries to be smart and does 10,000 more, then you're actually using twice as more power to do something that you might not need versus the only 5,000 you really need. So that's where they probably didn't do that for power reasons. So this way they don't waste cycles for nothing. It just does what you need to do. So maybe it's slower like that. Maybe it's 10, 20, 30% slower than what it could be, but at least it's using a lot less power.
Oh yeah, one kind of follow-up from ages ago, my Apple Watch battery is fine now. Like I went to bed last night at midnight and it had 40% left. So I don't know what happened. I was kind of scared about this winter cold thing. Usually the batteries run out, especially on the phones. So I thought, oh no, my battery's not going to make it through the day on my watch, but for some reason it's fine now.
Okay, that's weird.
I used to get warnings for my 10% around 6 o'clock at night, and now I haven't seen a 10% warning in a while.
Yeah, so there must have been a software bug that was either patched with 4.2 or something, or maybe there was a rogue app that was running in the background. So I don't know if you did a cleanup. Maybe you removed a couple apps from your watch.
No, I installed more. I haven't checked. I installed Carrot Weather, but no, nothing special.
it's probably an app that got an update, and that's why you are now have less problems. There was a rogue app that was consuming cycles for nothing. All right, so we'll probably circle back on this issue in a couple weeks and a couple next episodes to try to see exactly what you can do. I'm more aware of old devices like iPad 2s and trickle down iPad minis that you gave your kids, for example. So that those devices, they don't get any updates. I think they're stuck on iOS 9 or something. So they might not ever get an update, or maybe Apple will do something out of this world and issue like a dot release for all the old devices too, going back to, let's say, iOS 8 or 9. That would be crazy.
They do it sometimes, no?
Very
Usually
rare.
one version behind, maybe not. Like
yeah, exactly. Like you would get iOS 11 and iOS 10, but that is the worst case we saw yet. But in this specific case, it's such a bad problem. And they sold iPad 2s up until like a year and a half ago. So they are still like considered like recent device if you bought it new from the store. So I would hope that iOS 9 would get some update too. So this way, 9, 10, 11, I think you can cover like 98, 99% of the market. So that would be much better. But if they just do iOS 9 and 10 and 11, there might be like a good like 10, 15, maybe even 20% of the market that is not up to date.
because iPad 2 is on 9.5. No, sorry, iOS 9.3.5. The last release was August 2016.
Yeah, so it would be in desperate need of an update. All right, so moving on to some better news. We have a new alliance that includes a couple of companies that we follow, basically Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Facebook, and Apple. They are working together for one single goal, getting video size reduced. It's no surprise that video files are getting bigger. Now that we have 4K, we have HDR, Dolby Vision, all those nice high DPI file formats, the files themselves are getting amazingly huge. Like a H.264 file, MPEG-4 file that is 4K and HDR is 4 times as bigger. So it gets easily into the 8, 9, 12 gigs realm for streaming. And those streaming costs are amazing and huge for companies. So since then, we got the H.265, the HEVC video codec, so the high efficiency video codec. So that's the solution coming from the same companies that made the H.264. So it's a natural evolution. It's harder on the CPU. However, it's about the same size as H.264. So I would say that it's a good compromise for now, but you still have licenses to pay as a company using those file formats. So what they're trying to do right now is to basically design their own. They call it AV1, which is their open media codec. So it's an open codec that everybody could be able to use that would leverage all the new technologies in the codec world, but probably be license free. So that this way, all those major players would be able to leverage even better compressions, even better color accuracy, and maybe even be ready for future features without relying on somebody else to come up with a standard. So they could themselves, let's say that Apple has a new device coming next year and they want to incorporate some features of this new codec into their device. They can basically work by themselves. And then as soon as the WWDC rolls around and they announce a new device, they just commit the code changes to the common code base. And all the other companies can benefit from that. So it's a way for them to be more involved and control their destiny a bit more. And this way, they do not have to wait for somebody else to come up with a solution to their existing problem. And of course, there's always money saving, but it's mostly for control, I guess.
And you've had problems recently with this, like video formats and all, and High Sierra, and what video is like your 4K videos are captured in HEVC, but you can't edit them on the Mac yet. And
yeah, I got my iPhone, my iPhone, but the iOS 11 in September, of course, and from there I quickly enabled the HEVC codec, which is the high efficiency video codec. But macOS was not updated yet. It was not being able to read this codec, and iMovie doesn't understand it. Final Cut either. So then I switched back to the old codec on my phone. There's an option in the camera app, camera settings. So all was fine. Then I got my GoPro, and I realized that if I go into 4K, then there's only one choice. It's using the HEVC codec. So starting for the GoPro Hero 6 this year, the GoPro company basically made their own CPU, kind of like Apple does with its A line of chips. Basically, they made their own CPU, and it's optimized for their need. And one of their needs is to have a high bitrate, high quality, high compression video codec, and that's why they use HEVC. So I did a bunch of videos with my GoPro, and when it was time to edit, I realized that I couldn't update it. I couldn't use the footage in either iMovie or Final Cut Pro because Apple, with their Pro apps, is super slow. They probably had something ready for a while, but it still wasn't released, and they had the iMac Pro that was coming up eventually in December, and I'm thinking that it's more a marketing thing because once they announced that the iMac Pro was available and we started to see the reviews, all the reviewers had a beta version of Final Cut Pro with the HEVC codec support, with Dolby Pro, HDR Pro, whatever, all those new things, and all new color wheels to adjust the colors and everything. So everything was bundled in that single application. So from September to December, basically I wasn't able to use HEVC. Now I can. So finally I'm able to flip the switch, and finally be able to leverage smaller file size with better quality. So yeah, in this case, if it's an open format, I'm hoping it's going to be less tied to a device or OS release from Apple, but then again, it might not because it's a way for them to say that the new device or the new OS has a feature. So if you wanted to jump on it, but I'm just really hoping that the pro group at Apple basically works on those features and be ready in time when they release. Because having this new codec 2 months and a half in advance, it was awful. Because you want to use the new features. Like you look at any article, any review, anything, and it's always, oh, look at those new features. Here's the 10 features of High Sierra. And one of them is always, oh, this new HEVC codec. Okay, so I can see the file. I can hit space to preview it. But when I drag it into iMovie, I cannot edit it. When I drag it into Final Cut, I'm saying, okay, it's a expensive app. It should have feature for that. Nope, no compatibility. So it was really hard.
So if I look at my settings right now, I go into the camera, and then it says formats. It's okay to go high efficiency.
Yeah, because right now High Sierra reads it, iMovie reads it, and all of the iOS video editing app, if you have any, also have the libraries for that.
Okay, because I was waiting for your go. You're like my camera settings guy. I can't change them unless you tell me it's okay.
Yeah, no, it is now, so you're safe.
Okay, it's switched.
Good. All right, so talking about the iMac Pro, basically we have finally the nice iFixit teardown. So we're able to peek inside this new computer and see exactly what components are user replaceable or not. Well, user replaceable is a big word. Might be more Apple specialist replaceable. But yeah, if you scroll down, you can see, of course, the very nice space gray devices. That's great. You can see the vents and everything. Okay, nothing very impressive there. So yeah, the RAM sticks, they're real, legit, full-size RAM sticks. So they're not a proprietary size or technology. So if you have access to your motherboard, you could replace those with a kit. And I know that I think that iFixit already put one together where you can get 4 times 32 gigabits. The only thing is that you need to remove your back cover and everything. So it's a big pain. But still, it's possible. The SSD module, there are 2 of them, so that's why they are able to achieve such a big speed, which is, I think it's 3 gigabytes per second. It's because it's kind of using like a RAID and writing to both disks at the same time. They're not replicated, so if one crashes, you lose half your data. But the controller can move data to both disks at the same time, and they're not the run-of-the-mill regular, so they are NVMe SSD. So it's Apple came up with those a couple years ago, but I think you can still find them on the third-party market. So that can also be potentially updated. But the one cool thing that was very surprising is actually the CPU. It's not even soldered to the board. It's just a regular
A classic socket, like the classic pins and socket.
yeah, exactly. So that Intel Xeon W chip, you can potentially replace it in the future. I don't know what gives in terms of compatibility, but maybe let's say like in a year or two, there's a new Intel CPU that is much powerful. You could, in theory, open up your computer, remove the heatsink, change the CPU, put on some thermal paste, and stick everything back on it. So in theory, that's feasible. So it's not the end of the world. This computer is not that close. It's not easily accessible, but it's still upgradable for someone like in the SSD realm, the CPU, and the memory. The only thing that is really soldered is the GPU. So for that, there's no way to go about it.
I don't know if you listened to the ATP this week, but they're talking about like the replacing the thermal paste, like using a more special thermal paste. And now iFixit here is saying that it's time to reassemble this beast with some fresh thermal paste and see how it fares as a gaming rig. So they're probably going to try tests like scraping off all the thermal paste, putting on a super expensive one with the weird names, and then trying to see if they can draw more power out of it.
Yeah, actually, it works because I did that with my Bugsy Bugs. I had to replace the thermal paste because even worse. It was not a thermal paste; it was a thermal pad. So that's something that's super weird because it's a spongy material that over the years eventually shrinks down. So that's why my Bugsy Bugs was overheating. The CPU wasn't touching the heatsink properly. So I removed everything. I added some thermal paste. It was better, but not impressively better. So what I ended up doing is adding copper shims. So very thin piece of coppers of different thickness, basically to make sure that the CPU was touching the heatsink with no gap. And you just add some paste on top and below, and that's it, and you're good to go. And I was able to reduce my CPU temperature from like 97 degrees Celsius down to about 80 something with just the thermal paste. And then with the copper shim, I was able to go down to like 52 degrees Celsius, which was even lower than when it was brand new. So once again, they cheap out on thermal paste or thermal components, and with very, very, very simple manipulation, you can really get something better. So I'm guessing that if they do this exact same thing with the iMac Pro, you might get better performance.
Because the principle is you keep the CPU cooler, so it's going to run higher, longer, and just perform better. That's the principle. And the thermal paste, they cheap out because they're making tens of thousands of computers, and we're only buying paste for one. So
yeah, it's sad because you have two choices. Either you go with the thermal paste scenario where you need humans to apply it. They need to be applied properly, evenly, and the proper thickness, and not too much, not too little, just the perfect thing. Whereas, and that can lead to different performance because no two humans are alike, no two installation is alike. And then you say, okay, but what's the way to make this reliable? Well, if you solder the CPU to the board, then you have a lot less problems because it moves less. And then whatever you can apply on top can be even more precise because you don't need somebody to clip in a chip, and there's always a little gap, there's always a little margin. So you don't have that when you solder your board. So you have less extensibility, but more reliability in terms of installation. So it's always a game of what's the risk and benefits, but I'm more leaning towards the extensibility because it's not a lot more work to do proper paste installation and CPU alignment and everything. It's just needs to be done properly. And those Arctic Silver thermal pastes, they are more expensive, but then again, in the whole scheme of Apple, I don't think it would be a problem to leverage better thermal paste, unless the thermal paste that Arctic Silver is more efficient on the short term, but on the long term, it dries faster or it's less efficient or something. So that's also one thing I did not consider. So that might be why they're not using it. So, anyways, there's still solutions to be had for that.
yeah, and also you really don't want the one that was assembled on like Friday afternoon before a long holiday or something.
Yeah, exactly. Or okay, you need to do 5 more computers, and you have 50% of the time needed to do them, and then you have to leave. So okay, go.
Yeah, like for cars that are there's a lot of cars like specialty cars or whatever that are handmade, and there's one example that people always say: you never want a Ferrari with a build date in September, because Italians, they take August off, so when they come back from work, they're a little rusty. So you always want a car like from January, February, or March, or like beginning of the year. You don't want the end of the year because they're all coming back from vacation. They're all rusty. So
Nice.
it's like a thing.
Yeah. Hey. It makes sense because it's handmade. So
Yeah.
like you say, like if you do, I don't know, like you if you attach the leather to the steering wheel and you've just done 400 of those, then your 400th one will be super nice. But then if you go on vacation and you come back and the first one you're going to do, you're going to be a little bit rusty. It's going to be a little bit crooked. It's going to be a little bit tight here, a little bit not tight enough over there. So we had a future of transmit on iOS post from Cabel Sasser of Panic. So what's up with that?
Okay. So Cabel Sasser is one of the two founders of the company that makes a bunch of Mac apps and iOS apps. They're called Panic. They're based in Seattle. They're super old, and they have this really cool story that they were once like about to be bought by Apple to use their software. I forget what it was called. It was like this music management thing, and they were supposed to be working on the iTunes, and it's like a whole story, and it's a cool story. But anyways, they make the Transit app for Mac that's super popular, and they also have they made the Transit app for iOS, thinking, hey, we make this for Mac. It's really popular, and now let's make it for iOS. And after, I think it's been 2 or 3 years, they just look at their 2016 or 2017. Wow, it goes so fast. Numbers.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's crazy. And they just looked at their numbers, and it's just not worth it. I think they made 3,500, not $35,000 in the last year selling the app on the App Store. And it's just not a sustainable business, so they're pulling the plug. There's a couple of like quick notes that you want that they want you to know. Like if you want the app, like go download it now because it's gonna be off the App Store soon, but you can still download it from your purchases once you get a new phone or new device, or you decide you just buy it and uninstall it right away, but you want to have it for the future. They added iPhone 10 support, and also they're not touching the Coda app, which is like a text editor, and the Prompt app, which is like a terminal for your not Mac OS, for iOS.
Yeah, both are supposed to be going strong, so hopefully it's real. Because up recently, they said something similar, that everything on iOS was fine. It's just that the the status board app was not doing enough money. People were buying this $15 app to be installed on a $800 display. So they realized that people were not really buying many copies of this app, and they were actually spending a lot more money on the device that runs the app than on the app itself. So, but at this time, everything on iOS was fine. But now we learned that Transmit was not so fine, and they say that Coda and Prompt are fine. But are they really fine, or is it just for some reason like they just want to do one bad news at a time?
So it's been 2 apps in 2 years that they stopped developing because it's not worth it. It doesn't make sense financially. They say Transmit for the Mac is going very good. They just released an update this fall, for Transit 5. You remember we talked about the App the Human Story documentary movie, I don't know how to call it. And
yeah, the depressing one.
Yeah, fine. Like the last cut, the final cut, or the like official release version was really a depressing movie, I found. And it was all about Panic and how it's hard to make money in the App Store and how it changes. And this is just the proof that Panic doesn't know, but has trouble with the iOS App Store compared to the Mac App Store.
I think it always comes back to pro apps on iOS there still doesn't seem to be either the devices for them or the business options for them. Like maybe it all comes down to trials. Like the App Store doesn't allow you to do some trials, not in a very easy to understand way. You can now subscribe to apps and then you have like a month free, and that's kind of a trial, but it's you still need to remember to go to your purchases and unsubscribe, and there's some people that are forgetting that, and then the 30th day comes around and then you're billed for the year. And anyway, so there's no real way to do trial. And pro apps, since they're not cheap, they really are not usually impulse buy. If there's an app on the App Store that's like $130, you won't say, oh, it's like a coffee, I'll just buy it. No, it's not. At this price, you need some kind of a trial that is hopefully full featured, but time limited. And then once you really play with it and you try for a couple of weeks to include it in your workflow, then you realize that it makes sense for you and you buy the full app. But those code editor, those SSH terminal apps, they're still, I would consider pro apps because they are needed for a specific professional market, which is the developers, and they still don't have any trial, and that's why they cannot charge more money for them. Some people try. The Omni Group, they have much more expensive apps, but they've been there for 20 years plus, and they have a large faithful audience that always upgrades to the next version. So in their case, they might be less affected by that. But smaller developers like Panic, they don't have that huge pro following. So they need to kind of play with the App Store to give you trials and stuff. And it's not easy. It's not easy to understand by consumer. So maybe the only thing that needs to be done is just to enable proper time-limited trials. And then after a month, you get that pop-up that says your trial is over. If you want to continue, please buy the app with this one-time purchase or this subscription at this price, whatever. And that is something that people understand. People have been using that type of purchase method for the last 30 years. So I think it's just time that Apple released that for at least for the iOS App Store, for Pro apps and the Mac App Store also. So it just makes sense for me. And the app is called Audion.
What app?
The Panic app that was almost acquired by Apple to become iTunes.
Okay. Other thing to note, that's why everybody has been going to free apps basically, and then you can unlock all the features. So you can download the app for free. So that's like your trial period. And then if you want to use like the special features, you buy like the paid upgrade. But even that, like, I want to know if the paid features work. So it's still not like a good solution for trials.
Yep, it's still not the best. It's still just going around the problem, not trying to really fix it. I don't understand why Apple has such a problem with trials. I don't think they're a bad way of doing business because you have all the features and you have a time to to realize if you need it and then to buy it. It's clear. You have 30 days. That's it. If you do your app properly, you have the number of remaining days in the title bar, for example. So once you get down to the last couple of days, you have a little label there that says 4 days left, and then you have to really think about, do I really need this app or not? And it's nice. It's correct. Like, it's the way to go.
Yeah, they can use like the system-wide, like when you're tethering or when using location, you get like the green thing on top, and then you get the blue thing on top, like big status bar.
Yeah, exactly.
And then they already have like the principle of apps that expire with test flight. If you're running betas, I think they're 90 days, and then when it doesn't work, when it's done, like the app doesn't work anymore. It's pretty clear.
Yeah, but still, you don't have any warning in the app itself. So you need to either go to test flight or just wait until the very last moment to get that warning.
Right.
But still, yeah, you're right. They have some of the work done. They just need to streamline the experience, and that would work.
And it wouldn't be too hard for developers to, well, we'll see.
Well, it's once again, they need to change the way they approach the market. But I think marketing a trial version full featured with all of the features would be great. And then you just need to pay once you're expired. So I don't think it's going to be a problem because people understand the concept. I mean, by people, I mean developers and customers. They understand the concept. So it's easy to just say, oh, it's just a trial. Okay, fine. I have all the features for a certain time. Yes. Okay, good. It takes one sentence and everybody is on par with the same understanding.
Yeah, because right now it's a mess. Like, I don't know, I didn't subscribe to like the premium. I've got the like normal subscription, and this one is yearly but not monthly. But if I go yearly, I save like $20 instead of going monthly. It's really hard to get like the whole thing. I just want the whole app. What does it cost, and why am I charged more if I? It's just complicated for nothing.
Also, if you've been using apps for a couple of years, those same apps, they evolved. At one time, they were probably paid up front, very cheap, like $2. Then they realized that it was unsustainable, so they released a new version, which you need to buy again. Now it's $10. And then they realized that it's not sustainable, so then they have this recurring in-app purchase to enable the full feature, which is yearly. Then that's $15. And then now they have in-apps, they have app subscription. So if you already paid for the in-app purchase, you can continue to do so, and you keep your grandfathered in your price, which is $15. But then if you don't and you get the subscription, then it's $17 per year or cheaper. So you need like to try to remember what was the thing that I bought like a year or two ago, and what's my unrolling, what's my in-app purchase price? Is it still there? Can I be grandfathered in? Can I just drop this and get the new one? Like we did this recently for Infuse. We had like 2 days. We were like discussing like, okay, how much did you pay? What did you get? And it was a pain in the ass. It was awful. And like sometimes I would just like to just delete everything and start over. And then what's the new thing, the right thing? But then again, it's going to be changing like in a year if they ever release trials. So then it's be okay. You have like a rolling subscription, but then if you get the new app, it's going to be a trial first, and then a app purchase. I don't understand. It's going to be like cumbersome to understand. All right, so moving on to Review Corner. I've got a little device here that I'm going to move in front of me so you can hear it properly.
I don't even know what this is.
So this is... Can you hear that?
Not another keyboard.
Let me move it up to the microphone. So yes, it's a new keyboard. Woohoo! Yeah, so it's a new mechanical keyboard. It's a Varmilo EC key switch keyboard. So Varmilo is a Chinese maker of mechanical keyboards. They've been at it for a couple of years. They've always used, at first, the Cherry MX. Cherry Corporation is a German company who makes key switches for the last 50 years. Or even more. I think they have something from the 1940s. So they're reliable. They're the de facto standard in mechanical switches. But then over the years, I think their patents expired. And then there's a bunch of third-party copies that came up. So Kali is one. There's also another, I don't remember the name exactly, but there's a bunch of alternative, which are slightly different, still color named. So like you get the red switches, so you know that it's a linear switch and not another type of switch. So basically, the market is evolving now. And then we have Topre, which is a Japanese company who released a Capacitive switch, which basically means that instead of being just a little thing that moves up and down, it also does this, but there's like a dome with a rubber dome, and there's a dome spring, and then there's like a contact that happens, but it's not a pressure contact. It's just an electronic contact. So it's electricity that goes through two pieces. So basically, it's a bit different. And that was like a revelation. Like the feeling was great. The sound was much more bassier, if you want, and a lot less clickier. So people loved it, but it was just on the market. So it's still patented. So the only way to get that is to get either a Japanese keyboard from Happy Hacking Keyboard. So that's one company who does it. And there's Topre themselves who make their own keyboard, which are okay, but they're not fun. Like they don't have special designs. They don't have special layouts. So it's still hard. And then we have now Varmilo, who basically says, you know what, we're going to make our own electrocapacitive switch. And for that, that's what they just did. They are releasing this eventually, very soon, I'm guessing. I have a full layout, so 104 keys layout with a full keyboard with a numpad. And those key switches, they're a different take on this electrocapacitive key switches. So basically, instead of having a stem that goes down and touches a sensor point on the board, basically there are two little metal plates. Once they get to a specified distance and there's a specific amount of electricity going through those two things that are not even touching, basically that's when the trigger happens, and that's when you have the key register. So you don't have any contact, you don't have any contact, you don't have any rust that can go there, because let's say you do like a water damage or whatever, there's no physical metal touching. So it's just two prongs that are basically moving up and down, and they don't touch themselves. So they are safe. They don't rust. They don't wear down, because over time, any key switch eventually starts to feel different because parts are used and they grind themselves every friction they do. But in this case, there's no friction, so there's no wear, there's no tear. It works fine now. It's going to work the exact same way in 10 years. So you have a reliable and a consistent feel. And that consistent feel is what people are looking for, because gamers, for example, they tend to use the same keys a lot. So when in their game, they have key maps to certain keyboard keys, and those keys can be pressed thousands of times per session. And over time, I know that normally key switches, I think they have 5 or 20 million clicks, if you want, before they break down. But those gamers, they run through keyboards like we run through underwears. It's crazy. So this attempt by Varmilo to do something similar but different is interesting, because you don't have the wear, you still have the same feeling, so it's still mechanical. So you have the same similar sound, not the same. It's slightly different. It's slightly lower in terms of volumes, and it's slightly less. There's slightly less high frequencies, so it's a little bit more, I would say, down into the scales from bass, medium, and high. It's lower. So you have a different feeling, but you still retain the fun of a mechanical keyboard. You still retain the clickiness if you need it. For now, they are releasing this one, which is the Sakura pink switches. So they are very similar to the Cherry MX red. So they are linear switches. So there's no click in the middle of the travel. So it's a linear switch without any resistance. And eventually they're going to be releasing a green switch, which is the Greenway, I think it's called. It's going to be the same as the blue Cherry MX switches. So the one with the super clicky, like GP Grey and others. So the third key switch that's going to be coming up soon is going to be a rose one. So you have this type is going to be a linear key switch, very similar to the Cherry MX red and the Cherry MX black, which is the same thing, but the black is just harder to press. There's more resistance. You need more strength to get to the key trigger. So the rose will be between the red and the black. So I've been a long time fan of the Cherry MX red. That's what I have in my very first keyboard. And recently, the last one I got, the Leopold one, was basically Cherry MX black, which I love the feeling. But what I realized is if I have long typing sessions, I realized that when I had to document something at work and I had like a bunch of pages to type and I had all the information in my head, so it was an easy brain dump. I was going super fast at first, but then over time, after a couple of minutes of typing, maybe let's say, I don't know, like a few hundred words, I realized that it was getting hard and my hands were getting fatigued. So I realized that the Cherry MX black are a little bit too hard for me. So I should always go back to something that's equivalent to the Cherry MX red. So right now, the Sakura pink switches I have in this Varmilo keyboard is equivalent to the Cherry MX red. So that's perfect. And the rose switch will be slightly harder to press, but not as much as the black ones. So the Cherry MX. So that's going to be something interesting to also look at. So basically right now, it's still not available to purchase. It's going to be coming up, I'm guessing, in the next couple of weeks, for sure. I have a first run prototype unit, so it's not a final product. I wasn't able to choose the model, the size, or whatever. It's just like, this is what we have right now, so play with that. But the cool thing with those key switches, if you compare them to the other EC switches from Topre, the Japanese company, is that Japanese company, they don't have the patent to have the same stem shape. So this little cross shape, which allows you to change the keycaps to one of the multiple variants of keycaps they can find. There's a huge following of mechanical keyboards and customization keycaps right now in the world. And they were not able to use those same keycaps for the Topre keyboards. But these Varmilo key switches, they have the same Cherry MX cross type stem if you want. So you can use the ones you have on your existing keyboards. You can buy more on the different communities like Massdrop. They have a lot of those there, and they will fit. So it's the best of both worlds. The easy customizable features of the Cherry MX like key switches, the reliability and the feeling of electrocapacitive key switches, but less wear, well, no wear at all. Still the N key rollout. So if you want to type super fast and so many keys, it's going to trigger each and every one of them. They're going to work properly. And you have a nice feeling and you have extensibility. So it really is something special. The one limitation though, if you want to use those key switches into your existing board, that is not possible because in this keyboard so these two chips, they need to work together to be able to calculate the resistance and the electric current going between the stems and the key switches. So it is like all inclusive. You need everything to work together, so the board and the key switch. So you cannot just swap your existing board with those new key switches. You need the board that has the proper chip. So for now, and probably for the foreseeing future, it will be a Varmilo exclusive product, kind of like it was for Topre. They made their own boards and their own key switches. So, but still, it's something very interesting. If you are into mechanical keyboards, I will strongly suggest you to look into this. I see a very good future for Varmilo and those key switches. So it's fun to see new innovation in the field, especially in the keyboard field, which has been, I would say, very, trying to put this politely, very unexciting for the last 50 years.
Very static.
And then very static. And then in the last 10 years, people are starting to get into those keyboards again, dug up old keyboards, change the keycaps. We now have different profiles also. That's the shape of the keys. Like they would be set up in a curvature. Like so, if you look at your keyboard from the side, it's all very curvy instead of being flat. And some of them are thicker, like in terms of height. Some of them are lower profile. So there's so many variation now. So you can really like find the real keyboard that is perfect for you. Shape, color, texture, feeling, size, everything will be customized to you. So this is a brave new world if you prefer. So yeah, since it's not available yet, I don't have any price information. I'm guessing it's going to be probably the same prices that their existing products are, in the maybe $120 US average, maybe a bit more. I wasn't told anything about prices, so it's really from the top of my head. I just throw this price, but it might be just a bit more expensive because it's new and it's different. But then again, it probably will not be $300. So. All right, so that's it for episode 76 of RGBA. You can find us at rgba.fm/76. You can find us on Twitter at _RGBAfm. I'm on Twitter, Valia, VALLIERES.
And I'm Tyler Menard, TYLER, MENARD.
Have a nice day.
Have a nice week.